Oh my goodness, dear Scorekeepers. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of The Score. This is Minnesota Opera's podcast all about opera, classical music, and pop culture as seen from the perspective of three queer Black opera administrators. As always, I am Rocky Jones, EDI Director at Minnesota Opera. And this week, it's just me. Everybody's on vacation. Technically, I'm on vacation too, but I decided to drop in real quick and say hi. But, we're going to do something a little different. Well, I guess not that different because we did this around the same time last year. But what with it being the end of another fantastic year here at The Score, where we all feel so lucky that we get to have these conversations with you and have brilliant conversations with all of our wonderful guests and with each other, of course, that we wanted to compile a few of our favorite conversations, which is not to say that any of the other conversations were less than in any way. But these were just some of the conversations that, looking back on 2022, that we really enjoyed and we wanted to really share with all of you. And if you wanted to share this podcast with some of your friends or family, as I know some of you are probably unfortunately maybe stuck in the airport. Thank you, Southwest. Or, at home with your families and looking for something to do. Hey, share the score with them. Here's some little bite-sized pieces. Okay, shameless self-promotion over. We'll get to the fun stuff. But I just really wanted to take some time really to just thank all of you, our loyal scorekeepers, for just making this year just a lot of fun. Sometimes we get to talking about some pretty heavy topics, some heady topics also. But we have built this really beautiful, lovely community, and I'm so appreciative for all of you tuning in every episode, and for all of your feedback, and for all of the love, and just want to return all of that back to you. So sit tight. Enjoy, and we will be back in the new year with all sorts of fantastic guests that I'm so excited about. I cannot wait to have these conversations and share them with you. So enjoy the show, and we'll see you in 2023. Okay, so first up, do you remember this past fall when Lizzo went to the Library of Congress and played an antique flute and everyone lost their minds, apparently? Well, Lee, Paige, and I do. And so we had a conversation about it when it first happened, and we were baffled, and we had jokes. So enjoy Lizzo and the Crystal Flute, which I agree, beautiful name for an incredible children's book.
Something.
But one thing that, being the classical music podcast that we are, that we have been remiss in talking about for several weeks now. I was actually about to make a joke about it when Garrett was on the show, because he mentioned something about trying the flute, and I was like, don't try the flute, y'all. Because one of our faves, Miss Lizzo, queen, amazing singer, artist, musician, flautist,
yes,
went to the Library of Congress in my good old hometown of Washington, D.C., and was, shown a collection of, not ancient flutes, but historical flutes. Flutes with historical import. I was like, what's the word for old but not that old? It's been a long week, y'all. I'm sorry. Um, but historical flutes, one of which was a crystal flute owned by the fourth president of the United States of America, Mr. James Madison. And she played the flute. She played the flute later on at her show. And it was a lovely little moment. It was cute. It was just like, oh, what a cute little piece of history. Apparently not, according to some corners of the internet. And I was just baffled by this. I never even thought in a million years. I just thought like, oh, this is a cute little stunt that the Library of Congress is putting on, and what a nice little moment between Lizzo and I don't know what is her title, the librarian in chief, the
Maybe
head
chief librarian, maybe.
Yeah, she's a Black woman. These two Black women coming together. This, it's a nice little moment. But apparently it has led to the end of democracy as we know it.
It was at least as bad as that whole storming the Capitol thing, right?
Apparently.
Just it was I don't know. I'm trying to put myself in the position of finding anything wrong with what happened, and I can't imagine. I legitimately, like, I saw it. I had the exact same thought process that you did, Rocky. I was like, this is cute. Great. Moved on with my day. And I assumed everyone else was going to do the same thing. And I was so wrong. I was so wrong. People were upset. It seemed about whether or not Lizzo was qualified to play this flute, I guess.
Which is such a strange. Oh my God.
So weird. The fact that she played the flute at her show wearing a dance costume was apparently a problem because she was showing her body, I guess. And of course, if Lizzo is ever showing her body in public, then we have to have a conversation about that, apparently.
They saw her play it at the concert, and she just let out one little note, and they assume that she can't really play flute, or that she doesn't know how for real, when we have plenty of video evidence that that's not true.
All over the place.
Also, it immediately, anyone with sense would have seen that and said, yeah, that makes sense, because it is a crystal flute that belonged to a U.S. president. No, you think she's gonna just take it and break into choreography with the big girls? No. They were like, take one, let out one breath, one note, and give it back. I understood that immediately, but I guess other people didn't.
There were like 25 different things about it that disturbed me, like kind of deeply, including the fact that most of the people complaining couldn't tell you anything about who James Madison was, right? They'd go full Kiki Palmer, sorry to this man, right? Like, just no idea about who he was, what number president, if he was president, is he on the $2 bill? Like the whole line of complaint was ridiculous on its face. And then kind of like moving on from that, the number of false equivalencies between Lizzo playing the flute and any number of other things, like the way whataboutisms kind of play out in our current political divide, that was very strange to me, that this seemed like it could be equated with anything else that is like actually happening. And then the fact that Candace Owens never seems to have anything productive to do with her time, like ever. Like I legitimately don't understand what the situation is, that Like anytime somebody black is doing something that looks fun or interesting, that her immediate response is to sort of degrade them as about anything that she can think about. Like it's I really don't get it.
I mean, ma'am, first of all, go get yourself a bottle of lotion and then you can come and
Please.
talk to anyone about anything. But yeah,
Not
no.
lotion, a butter.
Mm.
Something with butter in the title.
I mean, and of course she's a part of the Kanye story as well.
Oh my god.
I don't have words because it fills me with so much just like sadness, but also
Yeah.
just like rage at the same time that it's just like I don't feel like anything that I could say would be productive.
Yeah.
which perhaps we don't need right now. Perhaps this is just the moment to just be angry. But it's just like and obviously like her con artistry has been well documented, alleged. So it's just like I don't even so it's just like I don't even understand like why people are listening to her at all, other than like,
the obvious reasons.
the obvious reasons.
Yeah.
Her and Christian Walker and all those folks that get up there, and now Kanye apparently, and just tear us down for sport.
They say what actually brought about the end of the Roman Empire was lead poisoning, because the water going through those, aqueducts was, the aqueducts were iron and rusty apparently. And then a lot of folks got lead poisoning, perhaps. Like I don't 100% know, I wasn't there. But a lot of people apparently started behaving erratically in the last several decades of the empire, including the whole leadership apparatus, right? I sometimes wonder, is it something in the air? Is it something in the water? Something in the food? Because a lot of people, it's like our relationship to rational thought has sort of just fallen apart. Like I don't know.
I
Like
mean,
I'm clearly
Feeling
grasping, but
off kilter.
I mean,
systemically
maybe, but
though,
Yeah.
but
it's not like a person or two here or there. It seems
No.
like maybe most people.
On a collective level, I often, not long after leaving my house, even when I'm outside and just with people and observing behavior and things, I often say to myself out loud, is everyone okay?
Yeah.
Is everyone okay? Are we okay? And I keep asking because I think we're not. I just don't think we are. It's felt off kilter since they let us all back outside.
I mean, I think that's part of it, certainly. I think for a lot of folks, it is sort of the capitalism of it all, and just sort of finding ways to just sort of hypnotize people and take their money, which is all how do you speak with asterisk F news, that network. That's all that is. Like, do you hate black people and have gold that you'd like to sell? But yeah, no, I mean, we went to the Costco last Sunday, my husband and I, and it was insane. Just the way that people just sort of had no regard for the other people around them, like the number of people that just like walked out in front of our cart, like while we were just like fully just pushing it down the aisle, or who were just like literally there was one moment where these two ladies were just blocking the entrance of the aisle and could not figure it was I felt like I was like playing The Sims, and like these two Sims were like in a room with no door. Just like meet mop, move meet move mop, and we were just like, excuse me, and they just could not figure out. And I'm just like, is the simulation glitching? What's going on? Like, it was so weird. It was so weird. But just sort of getting back to Lizzo, like the comment that I saw that really, and it was by a conservative commentator that I will not name because I do not want any of their people coming after us, child, because I don't have time. But essentially, they said that like Lizzo is like a weird, fat sex pervert who wears no clothes and twerks, and how dare this weirdo was the word that they used. How dare this weirdo be allowed to touch this incredibly important flute that I guess signed the Declaration of Independence and parted the seas. And it was just like, it was so crazy. Like, just like reading that, it's just like, how do you possibly get to that point where that's a thought that comes into your head and you're not like, am I high? Right. And then you put it down on Twitter, and then you have thousands of people going like, yeah, 100%. I totally, that's a thing. Like, what?
Some really like, that's some vintage brand racism right there.
Yeah.
To just like straight up being like, Black women are weird and perverse. And just gross. Saying it with your whole chest.
With your whole
chest. Like you're a European conquistador visiting the Congo for the first time or something. Like, and you're writing this in your journal about your travels. This is vintage. This is vintage racism. Yeah. Like, wow.
Like the LA city councilwoman who was caught on tape. Did y'all see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, I mean, that is just like, right there. Just like unvarnished. Just, I mean, it's just crazy. It's really so crazy.
And people don't even have sense enough to be ashamed of themselves anymore, right?
She was just, I'm not resigning. Until finally the president had to be like, I think you should resign.
Everyone in the room was just kind of been like, who gonna check me, boo? Yeah, I said it.
I mean, we literally have to have a whole congressional hearing about whether or not people attacking the Capitol, trying to overthrow the government, first of all, happened, and secondly, was inappropriate. Like, this is the activity that we're in right now, which is, I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm not that old, but I've lived long enough to know that there's something completely strange happening in this country, and people in other countries must be watching us being like, ooh, child.
Oh, they
right?
are. Go on TikTok. It's wild.
Yeah. Let me tell y'all, to our international listeners, if it seems like it's weird over here, it is.
It is.
And it's weird to us too.
Yeah. Also, can we also back to the Lizzo and the flute, the crystal flute, which sounds like a really cool children's story, actually.
That actually does sound amazing.
Free idea for someone who is an illustrator out there.
Absolutely.
Copyright.
Wasn't James Madison a slave owner?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
1000%.
What? Okay, you understand why I just had to this is a foundational fact to this story, to me.
Yes.
And the outrage, and probably if not my first, definitely my second thought when I heard that there was any outrage at all about what happened. I think in my head I went, over this slave owner's flute? Like, I know it's history. I know it's history, but
That apparently was a gift that he never even played.
so
So
history though.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we're all just looking at each other, just dumbfounded. My God. Can everyone just calm down?
No.
So this past spring on episode 28, we were joined by just the brilliant Lee, who is an artist, an activist, an educator, and the executive director of the Dream Unfinished, New York City's activist orchestra. And the conversation went in an interesting direction when Lee asked her a very provocative question, and I will start the conversation there.
If you ruled the world, imagine that. What would you want to see different in how presenting organizations are engaging underrepresented communities?
If I ruled the world, what a dangerous start to a question. Well, I'm if people have heard me chat about this stuff before, I really feel that we are in a very liminal time right now. And what I mean by that is that it's a very imperfect and in between time where, because pointing to your earlier question of classical music being stuffy and behind the times, it was so behind the times that I think in many ways there is now this sort of pendulum swing really hard in the other direction that I don't know we necessarily want to find ourselves in. Particularly with these, what I've observed, some institutions doing a sort of ambulance chasing, where it's like, okay, something terrible and traumatic happens, let's have a concert. Something terrible and traumatic happens, post it on social media, say who you stand with, and because then that opens and invites the question of, well, when were you standing with us before? Like where are the receipts of that solidarity before everyone found themselves on Instagram? So but I think that we are going to be in for this sort of bumpy and awkward period because we're reconciling with so much. And so as far as if I ruled the world and if things were, my hope is that we are eventually able to actually move past this and be in a space where really a lot of these sorts of artistic statements are more implicit than explicit. So, it doesn't have to be all these bells and whistles of, oh my God, we're programming a Black composer. But instead it's like, oh, the Black composer is actually next to like the I'm gonna try, like David Baker, his music is next to Brahms and is next to Alice Mary Smith. And this is just a good program. It doesn't have to be any awareness month. No one had to have died recently. Like this is, if orchestras are going in through their mission statements of feeling that they want to be stewards of an art form, then be stewards of the art form and present a balanced program that also happens to be actually quite inclusive and representative, and doesn't have to have all of this sort of fanfare that's associated with it. So I think it's doing things like that, and then also really sort of rethinking how it is that they engage with their audiences. And this is a thing that I had shared with the team at Minnesota Opera that I hope I can also share with listeners to the podcast, but this idea of Sherry Arnstein's ladder of citizen participation. So for listeners who aren't aware, it is this sort of framework or model that this sociologist Sherry Arnstein had devised. And it was actually originally created as a way of sort of asking and analyzing how it is that generally government agencies were working with communities in terms of any kinds of interventions, like perfect example being a playground. You know, did the community decide, number one, if they wanted the playground? Number two, where the playground is? Number three, what the playground is made of? You know, like those sorts of questions, because so often there are people who mean really, really well, but then they just go and make the playground without actually asking anyone if they wanted the playground to begin with. So that would be my other thing if I was this, you know, terrifying dictator, that how we can get folks to actually really reflect on how it is that they are speaking with stakeholders, and actually not just speaking with, but really authentically sharing power, so that any sorts of programming that is meant to be based or sort of speak to a specific audience, that specific audience has a voice, many voices at the table before anything is even implemented or operationalized.
The question that's coming up for me, and maybe because of as we talk about things like repertoire, and especially what folks with resources can do, something we've often talked about on this show is kind of the balance, especially when telling the stories. I think we've often talked about it in relation to Black folks, but really for any marginalized people, the balance of telling the truth, especially about our trauma, versus exploiting it, and where that line is, knowing that we need, you know, some of everything, like life is life is complicated. And I just wonder, like, what your thoughts are on that, on especially this trend of, or what often feels like having so much of the bad and not our triumphs, or at least something that's a little more complicated than just a tragedy, you know. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that balance, and even how you find it, if there's a way that you that you kind of strike that balance.
That's a tricky question, because I think it's an evolving thing, you know. So some of actually all of the music that the Dream Unfinished has commissioned and premiered has been really in response to some sort of awful incident. And, you know, that was in our earlier years. And I think partially part of the reason why we had made those artistic choices was because that was still at a time when it was, quote unquote, not really polite to engage in those topics. I know that on this podcast you've mentioned Joel Bentley Thompson and his 7 Last Words of the Unarmed. And there was a time when actually there were ensembles that were too scared to program that piece. Whereas now in 2022, it's sort of the thing to program, because it is unfortunately so topical and so relevant and so top of mind. So, so I think part of our rationale for when we did make those commissions initially was because there, at that particular moment, there really wasn't a space for artists who wanted to be composing and writing on these topics to then express themselves. There wasn't really an opportunity to go into these issues that were clearly that they wanted to be, you know, writing and generating work around. So where we are now, we, you know, actually we are working on some other commissions, but they are, as you said, Paige, decidedly not around these sorts of darker topics, and instead trying to use, one of them is, and hopefully if I can get all of this ironed out, but one of them is going to be really celebrating the poetry and legacy of James Emmanuel. And so I think it is actually this, and I've heard, you all on this show mention Black joy and celebrating the real sort of richness and positivity that can come out of one's lived experience. So I do, at least for this particular moment, see us working with that goal in mind. But as far as a sort of like more evergreen answer to your question, I think it's really just it's on the artist. I think that this is an instance where as a presenter or as someone who is commissioning new work, that rather than making any sort of dictate or parameter around it that's constraining their artistic practice, to instead just try to provide as blank of a canvas as possible. And if the artist wants to celebrate one thing or, commemorate another thing, that is their choice. And however it is that we can really just be best supporting that choice. I would really like to see foundations and funders and arts institutions moving more in that trend rather than having this sort of wish list, because I think that gets into the sort of commodification of trauma, and creating that sort of domino effect. Whereas I think artists want to be artists, and they want to make art, and that art should be what they dictate and not what someone else has made the decision on behalf of them for.
So this fall, we were also honored to be joined by the fantastic Garrett McQueen, who is an artist, an activist, a radio personality, host of the Triloquy podcast, among many, many other credits. Actually, we were also on the Triloquy podcast, Paige and Lee and I, around the same time in October. So head on over to Triloquy and check us out over there. But we had a great conversation with Garrett, and we had a really interesting conversation about the norms in classical music and sort of the conditioning that we've all been brought up with, and what are some of the ways that we can work to sort of decolonize our minds and sort of break free from some of that conditioning. So here's a snippet of that convo.
Among the privileges that I think about is the fact that, again, I grew up in Memphis. I grew up in a predominantly black city. I grew up in a city that wasn't only predominantly black, but where people are just real. People talk about how dangerous Memphis is and that sort of thing. And while that is true to a degree, I think it's just a population of people who don't accept certain norms, Mm-hmm. So, the further along I got in my career, the further away from that ecosystem I got. So I think that's really the main reason why I was forcing just my point of view and perspective, and continue to force that into so many spaces, because it just doesn't make sense to me for, there to be predominant, or maybe not, I don't know. It makes sense for some spaces to be predominantly white, I suppose, but for spaces to be all white, or 99% white in today's world, that shouldn't make sense to people unless you're living, somewhere like Anchorage, Alaska. But then even in that case, we got to talk about the indigenous people. So again, we've just normalized the separation of these spaces, and that has never been okay with me. I just so happened, at my undergraduate institution, University of Memphis, I studied with a black man. Shout out to Lacolian Washington. He's now at the Boston Community Music Center, running that organization. But so there were conversations that we had that mirrored my upbringing, so it was just also normal for me. So again, the further along I got, the further away from that ecosystem I got, and I felt like I needed to change it. I often think about Martin Luther King Jr. People need to understand that a lot of his activism was rooted in something similar. Down in Atlanta, There was a black fire station, a black grocery store. There was black wealth, of course, the black church. So when he got out into the world and saw that, you know, not all black people got to live that way, he wanted to change it. So that's really what I want to do in music. I just want people, and not just black people. I do center that, but I just want everyone to be able to exist as they are in their own spaces. So, you know, my long way of saying, you know, there are several people that I can name, you know, my parents, shout out to Lacolian, you know, the hundreds of people that I've gotten to dialogue with over the years in my work. But really the root of it is just having blackness normalized and seeing it not normalized in classical music spaces, and working to bridge those gaps, build a bridge between those two realities.
Yeah, because I mean, why do you think that is? Because I don't like to use the term predominantly white spaces. I prefer
Hmm.
white occupied spaces because I feel like predominantly white spaces like implies that there wasn't a choice that was being
Hmm.
made. Like, oh, it's
Mm.
just naturally, oh, just oh, we just like a river, we just flow in this one direction, and that's just like as if this wasn't like a deliberate choice that people were being made. Why do you think that is so prevalent in the classical music industry, in particular?
Because it's uncomfortable. Like
Mhm.
you're making an incredible point. There is intentionality behind everything in our world. Nothing is just because, and some of those whys are generations behind us, and not as easy for us to identify as it relates to their contemporary manifestations. But yeah, it's just uncomfortable for an orchestra patron or an opera patron to think about the fact that the space that they're in has been curated. You know, the audience experience that they're in is intentionally that. Once we, you know, can separate the emotions from all of those conversations, we can get to that space. That's why things like data and statistics are so important. You know, there are still a lot of people who just flinch up at the word black or the word white, you know, but if you just really look at the way marketing happens in most of the institutions, if you look at the way development offices work when it comes to individual giving and institutional giving, when you look at all of these things, you see the energy being pointed to one specific community. I think that that way of being and that way of doing traditionally has been seen as neutral, you know, whiteness being the norm or being the default, when in actuality you are pointing at one global minority, you know, actually at the end of the day, and relying solely on that. So I think we just need to amp up our bravery, put on our big boy, our big girl, our big person pants, and, you know, dig into these conversations and just realize the reality of it. Whiteness is not the default. It's not the norm. It's just what's been centered, certainly in classical music.
Could we take a thread from that and pull on it just for a second? Because I think what you're saying is something that a lot of folks need to hear,
Hmm.
especially one, that data is your friend in these instances. And then secondly, there is a history to understand if you're going to undo it, right?
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about maybe some of the things that you're working on either at ACO or ACF or anywhere else that actually work to do some of this undoing?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll shout out ACF. Under the American Composers Forum umbrella is a digital publication called I Care If You Listen. And there are lots of incredible folks over there doing that data-driven work just to show what gender breakdowns look like, to show how time as it relates to certain events, you know, impacts or doesn't impact programming. For example, you know, there has been violence in the Middle East and across the African continent for decades now. Everyone jumped to making programming shifts as soon as there was violence in Ukraine, and of course, our hearts go to those people, but that's just a reality that we have to face. I also think about, again, thinking about all the people I've had an opportunity to dialogue with. I want to shout out Titus Underwood. He's a Black man, principal oboe of the Nashville Symphony, and in our last in one of our conversations, he made the incredible point that the vast majority of the existing arts institutions today, the larger ones, were formed, if not during Jim Crow and straight up antebellum slavery. So why would Black composers make the stages at those institutions at that time in history? Why would there be Black performers or even audience members allowed in those spaces with these institutions built during that time? So if that's the foundation of American classical music as it's been institutionalized, of course, we see what we see today. It's just small truths like that, historical truths and contemporary truths, that I believe have to be the starting point and the baseline of the work. Again, the way things look is not just how it happened to be, it's the way that it was manufactured to be. So there has to be intentionality in undoing some of that work and transforming the field. That goes all the way down with the way we use that phrase, classical music. Folks who listen to the Triloquy podcast know when I say that phrase, classical music, I'm talking about any foundational music connected with culture. So I'm talking about the African djembe. I'm talking about the Chinese erhu, the Japanese shamisen, the Indian vina and sitar, the American iteration of guitar, hip hop, gospel, jazz. All of those are classical musics. We have just been conditioned out of this fallacy of neutrality and what's the norm to associate that phrase with a classical music tied to the culture of one very specific part of the world. So it's not to discount Beethoven and Brahms and Rachmaninoff and Puccini and all of those people. We just have to put the way we've been taught to think about that aesthetic of music into the larger context of white supremacy and what it means to actually, affirm the culture of a people, the classical culture of a people. That goes for food, that goes for architecture, that goes for fashion, but, we're in this world of music. So that's what I center on, really helping people understand the context behind our reality so that we know how to move forward.
So this past August, we had a new team member join the Impact team at Minnesota Opera, and we are so lucky to have Rick Hoops come aboard as one of our new youth music program directors. And they are an incredible educator, a brilliant artist, whose main focus is on degendering music education. And it's just such an amazing, wonderful topic, because I think of all of us who have been through, music education spaces, and perhaps were not cisgendered white folks, perhaps found the experience a little lacking in some ways. And so Rick has come in and really sort of transformed a lot of our youth music programs, Youth Opera Circle and Youth Opera Studio, along with the rest of the team, and have really turned these programs into something really, really special and amazing. And so we wanted to have Rick come on and talk a little bit about their work. And so check out that conversation.
Well, I will say this, and hopefully I will not embarrass you at all, Rick, but when we met you, you were actually interviewing for a totally different role. And as the interview was going, I kept thinking, there is something else I would really like for them to be doing with us. And I kind of took the very weird route of saying in the middle of the interview, how do you feel about being considered for a different role that I haven't even made up yet, because as I was listening to you, I kept having this feeling of, I wish we could go back in time 30 years ago when I was in middle school and really started working on my own singing in a more formalized way, and wishing I had a teacher like you who is expressing those kinds of sensitivities. We've sort of joked a little bit about it on the show, that growing up I had a higher voice. I suppose I still do. And, you know, in middle school, always singing with the girls, right, was not a super comfortable thing as it was. And then the ways that teachers perhaps were expressing their own discomfort with it, right, made me, the hyper visibility wasn't great. And then the fact that there were always complications in casting, and that being sort of placed on my body also wasn't good, right? And I internalized a lot of stuff simply because folks didn't have the information to guide me or other students or themselves in a way. And I think the only reason that I just didn't give up singing, which was so fraught at the time, was because I was so damn good at it, to be perfectly honest. So I thought about when well, I mean, the truth is just the truth.
Be honest with yourself. I know.
Never that.
So when we met you and you came in and you were expressing certain things, I'd already been thinking about this program and where we wanted to go with it. And I really knew that I wanted your brain power, your perspectives, your expertise lent to how we were going to hopefully open this up for a very significant portion of the kids who grow up performing, right? And so many of us feel that. So I kind of wanted to just give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what has informed your perspectives, and maybe sharing some of these perspectives with our audience.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was very sweet. A lot of what I try to do as a teacher is informed by my experience with teachers in the past and the teachers I wish I had had and did not. I had some wonderful teachers, but it was a long time before I experienced a positive queer role model. And I don't really think I ever experienced a queer singing teacher in my history. So that led me to feeling really stuck in like a highly feminine performance. Like, I am a coloratura soprano, so I sing this like crazy high rep, and there's kind of this assumption that I'm supposed to look or act a certain way. And that through college kind of got me stuck in a performance and a gender identity really that didn't align with who I am. And I think the pandemic let a lot of people experience their gender in a new way, and I am one of those people. So a lot has changed, and it's really informed my teaching. Something I have been developing is it's now like 11 pages long, but it's a resource for kind of guiding teachers and directors and arts administrators in how we can approach these things without making students feel othered, because that's something I experienced a lot, and I think a lot of queer students experience, is not feeling like they really belong in any spaces, and they have to kind of tiptoe around their identities for fear of not being taken seriously, not getting the roles. So something that I really recommend for teachers is just challenging the language that you have been taught. We hear a lot of male voice, female voice, but that's not even biologically accurate. Like, we have intersex people that exist in the world who at birth are not able to be identified as male or female. And there are scholars who have written for many years that we actually need 5 to 6 biological categories of sex. So really, we already can extrapolate that the false dichotomy of biological sex needs to be like challenged in a big way. So instead of using, male voice, female voice, men's chorus, women's chorus, we can rely on our Fach framework that we already have, just making it a little more flexible, not pressuring people to gender themselves a certain way based on Fach. Even the idea of having like boy sopranos, right, is kind of problematic because maybe they're not boys, maybe they're just sopranos and they don't look the way you expect them to look, and that's okay. So I think that's probably one of my biggest recommendations for teachers that can actually be really easy if we just take the time to make ourselves relearn something a little bit. But I think that's where people really have a holdup, is they're not willing to relearn. There's a lot of defensiveness in the expertise they feel they have, and their expertise is not flexible, which I think is a big problem.
So we were actually just talking about that in the previous segment, that inflexibility. And where do you think that stems from?
A long line of everyone teaching the same way, I think has a lot to do with it. There's a lot of pressure in opera to kind of get through these stages. You know, you're supposed to go to college, win competitions, go to grad school, win more competitions, and go off and be in a young artist program and be really successful. You know, there's like this pressure. And then the people who have followed that path are our teachers, and their knowledge is really valuable. But at the same time, there are ways that they have been taught that were probably damaging to them in ways they don't understand. And now what I think we see is students are identifying those things that have been harmful, and they're kind of calling them out and saying, actually, that doesn't relate to my experience, so I'd prefer we didn't use that exercise, or you didn't explain it that way, like that doesn't connect with me. And I think that's where that defensiveness can come in, and that inflexibility is because, well, that's how they were taught, you know, like what's wrong with that? Like I turned out really well, I did really well in this industry, so this is how it happens. But I think we just need to kind of adjust that and understand that everybody's path to success is different, and also what even is success. Like we can all follow different paths and still be successful. We don't need to all be taught the same things the same way. So yeah, I think it's just kind of an entrenched method of teaching that we've had for a very long time in opera and classical music in general.
I think about, I mean, maybe because we've heard so much about like challenging, especially teaching norms across the board, and like from everything from elementary school to music education everywhere. How do like where does intersectionality come into this for you? And what you've been developing, or even in your own life experience, and that can be with gender and disability, with gender and race, with gender and class, all of that, of course, is always present in the classroom as well. So how's that coming up for you so far?
Yeah, I think for me, as I've been making this resource, I've been trying to form it in a way that it can be applied to other forms of justice work, because my original framework is for queer justice in vocal music organizations. But I really think that a lot of the recommendations I'm making can be transferred to other forms of justice work. For example, I have a big section about asking our students for consent before we have them do something, or before we touch them. I don't even touch my students almost ever, because I think it's, you have to have a very clear conversation about why and where and what it's going to do. Or even something like mirror work, right? Like someone looking in the mirror and being asked to look in the mirror by their teacher and just experience their body. We don't know what history of trauma they have. We don't know how their body has been marginalized in the past and how that affects them emotionally still. Like we have so many practices that we haven't really zoomed in on and thought, how does this affect people with intersectionally marginalized identities, right? Like someone who is disabled and queer might look in the mirror and have a really hard time experiencing their body in a public, like, it's one teacher and one student, but that still feels really public. It's not a personal space. So I think intersectionality is always on my mind, and I definitely need to do more work as I develop these resources to include people of the global majority as I work on like racial justice and equity and wrapping that in here. So I've been lucky to speak to a couple colleagues who have given me some great input, but I definitely think we have to consider intersectionality and understand that justice work can really be connected to each other. So justice for one group of people can really translate into justice for a lot more groups of people.
Yeah, definitely.
And, to your earlier point, some of my doctoral work concerned the history of vocal pedagogy and also the history of conservatory programs. And really, one of the takeaways is that in the last, 130 years, the ways that we teach have not changed, like whatsoever, right? We could go back to the first decade of the 20th century and it will feel very, very similar to, how I experienced music education in college and to how you experience it as well, Rick. And some of the thinking behind Youth Opera Studio and Youth Opera Circle are two new classes have been pulling away from the gender and pulling away from the racialized pieces as well. And Rick is team teaching that with two other folks, Sarah Sawyer, who's been with us for a number of years, and Jared Miller, who has also taught with us for the last couple of years. And if there are things that you can share about some of how you're thinking about Youth Opera Studio and Youth Opera Circle as opportunities to do that differently, it would be great to hear that in advance of the auditions on August 29th.
Ooh.
Absolutely. It's been a really exciting process to be part of this curriculum development. And I think where I've been coming from is really making sure that we can dig in, but also zoom out and see how things can affect students. So in designing even our audition forms, right? Thinking about what questions can we ask? What questions do we need to ask again in different spaces? Like, how can we engage with students in a way where they can be open with us? And also, how can we engage with parents and the community to make them feel like this is a good place to send their students that's going to be welcoming? So we're still in the thick of curriculum development, but I'd really like to see us continue to move forward with care when it comes to what our exercises are going to be, what repertoire we're picking for people, when it comes to rehearsal tracks or giving students examples of great singers, which singers are we putting in front of them, right? We don't have to keep putting the same singers in front of them over and over again. So just continuing to move forward in a way where we're really considering all aspects of our decisions. What is the impact really going to be on a variety of different groups of people? Because I've experienced a lot of, classes myself or looking at curriculums that I've taught through other places. And I feel like that amount of attention just hasn't been put in. And I think that's, square one. How can we really make inclusive, equitable, accessible, diverse spaces? We have to be that considerate from the get-go. We can't just change or adapt when we're asked to. We have to kind of anticipate what the best practice for right now is going to be. And I think that's something that we're doing and are going to continue doing as we develop Youth Opera Circle and Youth Opera Studio.
So if there are any parents out there that feel like this is the program for their child, so you mentioned that auditions are August 29th. How can people get involved or sign their kid up for auditions?
Well, I believe there is an audition form that is live now. Lee, do you know where that has been posted or who they can email to get access to that form?
Absolutely. Our very capable manager of our education programs, Faye Chen, can answer all of your questions, and you can reach Faye at ychen@mnopera.org. A big shout out to Faye, who's been doing the Herculean task of keeping the trains moving as
Trying
they
to
need
coordinate
to.
all of us.
And doing it with the
Amazing.
smile as well. So very, very excited for the work that all four of you have been putting in, and also to Pablo Siqueiros, who formerly was with the company, whose really thoughtful leadership of the programs for the 2 years prior has really helped us to get to a place where this dream of mine is now a reality for young folks in the Twin Cities. So yeah, super, super excited about it.
It is exciting. Truly, truly exciting. I cannot wait to see how it all goes down because it's going to be fantastic.
I know, I'm like
Sooner than we
just
think.
waiting. I
Yes.
know it feels like it's so far away, but then I'm gonna blink and it's like, oh my gosh, we have to pick rep for everyone now. It's gonna be so soon.
It's already like tomorrow.
I know,
Truly.
seriously.
I didn't want to say that, but yeah. Well, Rick, this has been illuminating and so excited for the work that you are embarking upon. Cannot wait to see everything that happens in the next few months, the next few years, and hopefully this makes a huge impact when it comes to opera education, because I just think it has the potential to just be something that's really special, really exciting, really, really changes the game. So in May, Minnesota Opera mounted an incredible production of Carmen, Bizet's Carmen, directed by the legendary Denise Graves. And in the run-up to the show, we did several shows about Carmen, one of which featured one of the singers who sang Carmen, an incredible young Black mezzo-soprano named Zoie Reams. And she was kind enough to watch 2001's Carmen Hip-Hopera, starring, of course, our fave, Beyoncé Giselle Knowles-Carter, and to sit down and talk to us about her impressions. And so we had a good time with Zoie. So please enjoy this next snippet with Zoie Reams. Well, switching gears a little bit, since you are about to make your Minnesota debut as Carmen, we thought it would be super fun to go back into the archives and watch 1998's Carmen, a Hip-Hopera, starring one Miss Beyoncé Giselle Knowles-Carter, the Queen.
The full name.
Yes, absolutely, always. Because we stand on this podcast, so any excuse to get Giselle in there. Oh, it's from 2001. Oh, my bad. 2001. Excuse me.
The costume's been very clear.
Love it. Love
2001.
Yes. Okay. Excuse me. Directed, of course, by the legendary Robert Townsend. Yes, absolutely. We have to give him his flowers as well. But I realized in watching it that, like, as much as MTV as I was watching in the late 90s, early 2000s, and as much as I was standing Destiny's Child and Beyonce, I had never seen it before. But I know
Shame.
I know, right?
I had heard about it like in college, I think. Someone had brought it up, and I had actually only seen Carmen Jones, which is a testament to basically my mom and her being, of that era and being like, one of our favorite things to do is watch black and white movies. And even though that's not, black and white, it's earlier, much earlier than 2001 Carmen. But yeah, I think someone, and I didn't believe it at first. Someone was like, oh yeah, Beyonce, blah, 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 and Carmen. I was like, I just heard Beyonce and Carmen. And I was like, and I didn't have to dig that far, but I found it. And I was like, I was took. I was like, wow, okay.
I mean, I have to say, I was impressed. I
impressed
had a
too.
good time.
Absolutely. I mean, I know people that don't love it, but at the same time, she's holding her own. Like, And I also think for me seeing it, I expected her to sing and the men to rap. And I love that she raps. Like that's one of my favorite things about it, is that I love that she raps, because I think it shows like, I mean, I think also a lot of people don't realize like things about opera in general and how kind of rough it is. But like Carmen lives a very fringe life, like actual Carmen, like how she moves through the world in today's modern society would be considered rough, right? Like, and I think that a lot of time people see this like opera heightened version, and we're kind of talking about this too, about, you know, the actual novella compared to the opera, Bizet's Carmen. It's like this elevated, like kind of coy but still sweet and sexy version of Carmen, whereas like the novella Carmen, she's rough. Like she's rough. You know what I mean? And like I like that she was hanging with the boys in the Hip-Hopera, because that's what Carmen would really be doing. I appreciated that, and I think that a lot of times people don't really like understand what's going on in opera. Like it was funny, I had a conversation with my mom, and I was like, yeah, so then they, you know, the whole kind of act 3 and 4, and I'm like, yeah, and then they take the contraband, and she was like, contraband? I don't remember that part. And I'm like, yeah, Ma, like they're literally smugglers. Like that's what's happening in this opera. And she's like, oh, I don't remember that. I'm like, yeah, the same way that no one remembers the Queen of the Night aria is, you know, someone's mother telling them to kill someone else, and if they don't do it, that they're going to kill her. Like no one remembers that, right? Like, oh, it's just like, you know, but it's like the core of what's actually happening is like very intense and dramatic, which is another reason I think that basically opera needs to be everywhere, because what more drama do you need in your life besides that? Anyway, that's tangent. But yeah, I love Carmen the Hip-Hopera. I love that she raps, and I think it's fun and cute. I know people who don't love it, but I kind of love it.
You know, your point about Beyonce as a rapper is a really interesting one to me, because I remember I hadn't seen it in 21 years. I watched it when it came out because of my obsession with Beyonce and my ongoing interest with adaptations of opera and theater in what I consider to be the real world, right? And the challenge I had with it as a college student watching it was the idea that Beyonce, as my generation's preeminent vocalist, was cast in a role and then asked not to sing, right? And because Beyonce is such a sophisticated musician, she negotiates the hip hop extremely well, right? But I kept wanting there to be like one of these moments where the emotion gets really heightened, and instead of her like rapping kind of in the middle of her voice, like she would like plant her right foot, throw her head back, and like give us a full throated something. Because I think the challenge for me, and I will say again before the beehive comes from me, I have been in love with this woman since the mid 90s. There is not a question of anything other than her utilization. And it is simply this idea that like, because growing up, I was very into women rappers. Like it was something that I found so compelling. There are people who actually really do what they were asking Beyonce to do, right? Like, I can't get over this idea that Foxy Brown and Eve weren't sitting at home watching the hip-hopper being like, right? Like, there's this whole cohort.
Ah, Foxy Brown! I'm kidding. That's hilarious.
I just kind of wonder, like, Emil, Soleil, Mia X, there were all of these women who like were making so much money. Lil Kim, right? Selling sexuality, hardness, and hip hop. And they kind of went with Beyonce, who is extraordinary, but especially like late 90s, early 2000s Beyonce didn't really sit in that space of like owning her sexuality in the same way, right? And there were moments of it that like, because I watched them back to back, Carmen Jones and then
oh cool, and
Carmen the Hip-Hopera, there's a way that like Dorothy Dandridge negotiates every bodily movement, every arch of the eyebrow,
Oh my gosh.
right? With like this, with
So good.
absolute aplomb that Beyonce hasn't yet developed into the performer. She was only 20 at the time, right? Who
Yeah.
can do the same kinds of things. I mean, that said, like she had some great moments, right? She manages to pull all of the emotions where they need to be. The way they switched up the death at the end,
Yeah.
like, you know, I felt like I was really, really here for it. And I appreciated a lot the supporting cast. I
Mhm.
forgot that Mekhi Phifer used to look like
Yeah.
that.
Mekhi. Wow.
I was like, oh yeah, that yeah.
Okay.
Police officer Mekhi. Uh-oh.
Yes.
Right. But there were moments like between like Raw Digga, Mos Def, their relationship to rap is just very different from Beyonce because they
Yeah.
are differently skilled, right? And I
Mhm.
couldn't quite let go of that
Mhm.
because I guess I couldn't. I was just so present to how outside of her skill set Beyonce was sitting. So whatever else was going on, she also had to like, I have to make this work. And then they
Right.
kept reminding us by like giving us backgrounds of Destiny's Child songs that like, no, she
You're like, wait, what?
right. It's like she does other things. We're just not asking her to do any of them. But again, like it's an enjoyable way to spend an hour and 45 minutes, right?
Right.
Like it is very, very fun. I just wish, what is singing at? Like that's all I kept coming back to.
100%. I mean, it's interesting because I felt it's funny as I'm working through Carmen, Bizet's Carmen. I find myself, and this is another thing going back to kind of like the heightened version of it, right? Like if you really look at the source material and the score, a lot of music that Carmen sings is dance music or folk song-esque of her time and place. It's not this heightened, like overdone, perfectly operatic music. I mean, the music in itself is amazing and perfect and beautiful, but the way that she comes off singing it, like I said before, a lot of it, some of it she sings to herself. These are just songs that she knows that people happen to just stand around and want to watch her sing it because it's the most compelling thing they're going to see all day. And I think that like I liked the rapping part because it was closer to speech. And I think something that I'm learning as I'm learning the role is bringing the singing closer to speech. It's funny. I think Jose really has the more heavy lifting in terms of singing opera, if you will. I mean, I'm still going to approach it with my operatic instrument, but the way that the music is, his emotion is translated in the actual music, where Carmen, and this is also a test to her personality, where she doesn't really let people in and she doesn't let people, know what she's thinking, but she's just singing songs. A lot of them are songs versus an aria or some grand emotional gesture, which is pretty much all Jose does every time he opens his mouth. Is extremely torn and extremely vulnerable and extremely heightened emotion, right? Whereas Carmen opens her mouth and sings the Habanera, which is a complete dance melody, or the Seguedilla, or, I mean, there are very few pinpointed parts in this where I would say maybe in the duet, and maybe you could argue for the card aria in Act 3. Other than that, a lot of what she's doing is reacting, and I think it would, dare I say, let me not get fired, it would translate closer to like rap or speech versus some operatic aria. And I think that's what I identified with it in the Hip-Hopera, was her closeness. I appreciated her not singing because the closeness of rap to speech was something that I identified with in the actual opera itself. And I thought that was cool. I thought, of course, somebody could have wrote some music. Quincy Jones could have been up in there. They could have done something, but they didn't do that. And I think it's interesting because it would have been easy to have Mos Def, you know, have something on there or something like, but they didn't do that. And I think it kind of pulls the actual source material Carmen into 2001, which is like a cool parallel thing for me to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there were a lot of pieces that I was thinking about relative to the overall construction of it, right? Like how they were utilizing the music, because it was very apparent that like the proximity between speech and music, utilizing hip hop as that instrument
Totally.
is very important and very logical. Where some of my critiques did come in is what they chose to musicalize as opposed to what they left as a scene, right? And then no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, 100%. I agree with you. There were some funny parts that I was like, wait, girl, what? Why did you do that?
And then kind of like so Reagan Gomez Preston and Joy Bryant are two of my more favorite actresses from, you know, 90s transitioning into the 2000s, right? And I felt like with both of them, it was like a curious underutilization, especially like
I felt the same way.
Yeah, like Michaela is a very interesting character, and I think Reagan was such a good choice because she has like this really sweet disposition. She's absolutely gorgeous. Like she has this girl next door quality, and then it's like, we are going to give you nothing to do, and it's like, can y'all find for this lady to do in this movie? So that part was a little weird to me, but
no, it could have been something where she was, you know, once she realizes what has transpired with her fiance, there could have been a sickening bar there. There could have been like, there could have like a good "I'm leaving you" bop. Like I live for that.
No, she just slapped him and said, "I hate you," and ran away.
I know,
girl.
That's all you got.
We definitely need like a woman scorned moment, especially with the liberties that they took at the end. I feel like, why not take some more liberties? Like, might as well like have a moment. That's so true. I never really thought about that, but yeah, we definitely needed that moment of like spotlight, woman scorned, like, I am out of here, girl, bye, that vibe.
And speaking of the music, like, I guess one of the critiques, I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it so much. My whole
I love how we're like, we loved it. Please don't be mad at us. It was the
best. Please don't come for me. Please
don't come for us.
If it were to be done again, like, I would love to see more utilization of just like the different types of hip hop even to articulate different moments. Like, how dope would that be if there was like if there was more of a Southern rap vibe at some point where it fit, or something sounds like more, or
Blaze was a little bit more West Coast.
A little G-Funk in there kind of vibe. Like, I would definitely, that's what I would want to explore if it were
really cool,
done again, because hip hop has so many different colors and
that's
so many different flows and all of that. I think Mos Def tried to bring us a little bit of that, who I appreciated so much watching again. I mean, one, I already love Yasin Bey. Yes, Yasin Bey is Bey. Love him, and it was just so good at playing like a very sly character, and the way he just flows like fit it perfectly. I had to tell like my housemates, like, y'all, actually, I think this is way more interesting than maybe how the character turns out in the opera.
Oh, that's true. And I think like everyone does kind of have their own little, I mean, that's a super like operatic thing to do, right? Like everyone has like, we're talking about like Wagner leitmotif, like except like rap, like that's like what we're saying, which I think is like really cool. And like, no, I totally agree. Like Beyonce and her crew have music, and like even there are parts in the score where, you know, Jose, you were reminded that he's a soldier with the way that he sings, or or even the way that Carmen imitates him, which is really fun and interesting too. Like she imitates, you know, bugle horns and things like this. And yeah, that's a really good idea. I never thought about that, but I love that. Different types of rap. I love it.
Well, now all I'm thinking about is Lil' Kim as Carmen.
Oh my God, can you imagine?
Can you imagine?
A remake with like Meg the Stallion.
Oh my God.
Oh yes.
Oh, we just made $1 million.
Hold on.
Copyright.
Yeah, someone to write that down. Like literally, I feel like Meg, or even like, I don't know if you guys know her name, but well, her name is literally No Name.
I love No Name.
I feel like somebody like that, like a true like lyricist, how insane would that be? Like, and I feel like she would totally be in her element. I also think it would be interesting, like, for her to speak on, like, because Carmen also kind of does this too, like, to speak on her life, like, to just be able to speak on her life and her culture. And like No Name, just like, that's what she does. I'm kind of sad she's like no longer really making music, and that like hurts my feelings, but she's actually I'm not gonna say she's my friend, but our moms are really close, and our moms are close, and I've met her once, and I think that would be something that's like really like up her alley, and I think she would really be able to bring something like super cool to that.
Yeah, now that you bring up someone like No Name, like another thing I appreciated about the Hip-Hopera is just like there's some interesting like intracommunal dynamics amongst Black folks that it explored. Like it's like what you're saying about the novel being more gritty than the opera. Like I feel like the Hip-Hopera got back to some of that, and like the dynamic with among the cops and or among how people view them, or you know, the friends running off like with this rapper or whatever is like really real as or you know, chasing the fame or the money and you know, getting excited and swept away by that. And like I feel like someone like No Name or like other like really thoughtful MCs could get into that even further.
No, 100%. Like I think totally that would be like a version of like literally uplifting the culture, because they would totally and they would also murder it. Like it would be so good. Like yeah.
So earlier I mentioned the production of Carmen that was directed by DENYCE Graves. Well, we were blessed and highly favored. We did something good in a past life because we were able to sit down this past May with the legend herself. So here is a little snippet of our conversation with, I mean, just somebody who has been just such an inspiration to all of us for such a long time. So please enjoy this snippet of our conversation with the legend, the voice, DENYCE Graves.
So I had the wonderful pleasure of being in the rehearsal room for a couple of days about a week and a half ago. And I was really taken by the deft hand that you had with the cast and the approach you took. I was watching very closely when you would speak with Maya or Wanwi, and I could hear the kinds of things you were saying that were really about character development and also building the relationships between the characters. And, you know, it was really wonderful to see because you did it in such a thoughtful, knowledgeable, warm way where I could also feel the affection you had for the piece. And I think that that lends a lot of support to something I know Rocky and Paige also feel strongly about, which is that our industry needs to see more Black women directing opera. Could you share how a move in that direction with more Black women, more women of color directing could be beneficial for the whole art form?
It's a whole other perspective. It's a whole other perspective entirely. You know, one of the things that we say at my foundation, at the DENYCE Graves Foundation, is that we want to provide a space for people to be in the room at the table, right? I would say this, that I believe that most people in the world are good, honest, and decent people. But then we've got the other few, right? The rascals.
Mhm.
And people don't know what they don't know. Like you don't know what you don't know, right? I mean, I was 13 years old and I said I wanted to be an opera singer. I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know what that meant. And one day I want to get married. I had no idea what that meant. You got to be in it to know it, right? You can't read about it. You have to experience it. And until there are other perspectives in the room, you don't realize that you've got a blind spot, and several of them. And you don't realize that this world is made up of all of us. Everybody's voice is important. There is no one voice more important than somebody else's. God created every single person to be individual, to bring something to this human experience that we're all having here. And particularly now in this era where we're in this sort of consciousness where people are really looking at belonging, and it's so interesting how the pandemic stilled us all. Okay, pause globally. Okay, everybody, we're gonna take a chill pill like everybody. We're gonna be quiet right now. And we're gonna see what we see. And people could see unfolding pandemics on many different levels, right? Now, we've been saying some of it the whole time, but the great fortune is that now people have cameras. And people can see for themselves, like, we're not making this up. We've been saying this the whole time. This thing is happening, right? But people could see it for themselves. And I'm going to say something may get me a little bit in hot water because I don't know if you're red or blue. But I remember after the last election, some of my friends said, like, this is not the country that I thought it was. And I was like, it's the country I thought it was. But, you know, but some people were shocked. And I understand that. You don't know what you don't know. But until you come out of your comfort zone, until you stretch out across the aisle, until you meet somebody else who's not like you, all you've got are these stereotypes. Yeah. That's all you've got, right? And so I'm saying all of that to answer your question, like, why is it important? Because the world is made up of all of us, and everybody has a unique and important story to tell and a very different perspective. And you can't have and we also think of the theater in particular as being a place that transcends all of that stuff. When you listen to something beautiful, I think that the judgmental mind stops. You see a beautiful baby, you say, oh my goodness, look at that child. Look at that gorgeous baby, no matter what they are. Or if we hear something funny, we all laugh. We don't know where the origins of that, who made that joke, or who, you know, when we hear something beautiful, I think our judgmental mind stops and we immediately go into our hearts. And that's another thing that the pandemic really showed us what was essential, right? Because what were we doing? We were reading books, we're listening to music, we're watching movies. We leaned on the arts as an anchor to keep us upright and to make us human in a time of such incredible uncertainty that nobody had any information on how we were going to get out of this thing or how it was going to work, especially when it first hit and people were dying like crazy and we were all panicked and didn't know what this crazy contagion was that was in our midst. And we were all at home, reconnected with things that are important, with our families, right? With our friends, with art, with all of that. And it's not until it's really not until you have the opportunity to really look outside of yourself that you can really appreciate that our experiences here are greater than just our life experiences. There's something going on here that is greater than who we are as individual human beings. And that's that. You mentioned Maya Angelou, to quote, "We are more alike than unalike." The thing that binds us together are our humanity, are our love, our hearts, the same, all of the things that we all share in the whole wide world, right? But people have all kinds of different experiences. Like, you know, you can go to the store one way, I can go another way, and on that route something happens to you that does not happen to me, and I have a very different experience. And we bring that because it reminds us. Why is it important? Because it reminds us that we're more alike than unalike. It reminds us that you might be Asian, you might be, I don't know what, you might be French, you might be Black, you might be white. The thing that connects us all together is our humanity, right? There are so much that we share across the board. I don't care who you are. Everybody wants their children to have a good life. We all want to have good lives, right? We want that for our parents. We want them to be healthy. We want them to be happy. We want that for ourselves. We want that for the people that we love. We all want that. Everybody wants the same thing, right? But when you see that people do life and have very, very different life experiences, what it does is I think it makes you more compassionate. I think it makes you a more tolerant and compassionate individual. And then you don't judge and say like, oh, all Asians are like this, all Black people are like this, all white people are like that, because you have experiences that tells you differently. But until you have those experiences, all you have is the conditioning that's out there. And it's out there. It's out there. My girlfriend was telling me the other day that her little daughter, who's 3 years old, said, you know, she was talking about a little girl who had short hair and say, well, all girls are supposed to have long hair. Now at 3, she got that message from somewhere. It came through loud and clear. It's a lie, but that's what she received. And they receive everything else too, right? And so that's why when they, you know, the cop asked that white policeman who killed the Black boy, why did you do it? And he said, I don't know. I totally believe him. Because somewhere he got the message in the bedrock of his foundation, that Black men are evil and dangerous and to be feared and all this stuff. That's why it's so gorgeous to see, you know, Lee sitting there with a beautiful, talking about this story and this beautiful, you know, Carmen picture, and to see, you know, Rocky there talking about opera and telling this story and bringing this story to the masses, because we don't see you doing that. We don't see your faces doing that. We're happy to see your faces in all the films that'll show every scene in jail, mm-hmm. or hanging out on the corner, or all of this stuff that we have been just inundated with our whole life, this incredible lie that everybody drank the Kool-Aid from, everybody, including us. Yeah. That's the most dangerous part, is that we believe we're not supposed to like rise to a certain, but I think that has changed. And I think that is changing. Look at these 4 beautiful, beautiful brown faces. It breaks my heart wide open. I could cry. Talking about opera, which some people consider to be a white European art form, right? Like, what are you doing there? We can accept that you could sing hip hop, right? Or gospel music. We can accept that, but we can't accept this, right? So the reason it's important is because we break down these lies and the stereotypes, and we open up people's consciousness and awarenesses that this stuff that we've been telling is a lie, and it's hurt us all. It's hurt Black people, it's hurt white people, it's hurt Asian people, it's hurt all of us, right? And so now we had that period of incredible stillness where we started looking at saying, is this the kind of world that we want to have? Is this the world that we want to live in? And now we're piecing it back together.
And of course, we could not end the year without a little bit of pure Black joy. So we came back from summer break, and it turns out it was the Renaissance. So I think this was the purest, Blackest, most joyful we were all year. And so take a listen to us losing our minds over Renaissance, which rightly so. And I hope you all are still losing your minds over Renaissance and that Beyonce gets all of her things when these Grammys come around. Okay, I'll stop. Enjoy the conversation. Yes, it is time for Pure Black Joy, where we celebrate all of the Black people, places, things, ideas that are making us happy this week. I think it goes without saying, y'all, we are in the middle of the Renaissance.
Yes. Yes, honey.
So, honey. And we could do a whole episode about this album.
And maybe we will.
Truly could.
I mean, obviously, I think it is a masterpiece.
I think it is sublime. It is.
Yeah.
It's everything.
Wow.
Like, I don't even. It's hard to put it. So, have your feelings about "Break My Soul" changed at all, Lee? Now that the album is out?
No, but perhaps this is a great segue to my Pure Black Joy.
Oh, okay.
Because it is related to the House of Queens Vogue remix, which is my absolute joy. I just have to say, like, the idea of giving flowers to people while they are still around and acknowledging the sort of artistic through line that has created Beyonce's aesthetic and just people that she likes. And on that remix where she gives so much acknowledgement to a group of Black women who have been really critical to my own development as an artist and just as a person who listens to music, that song made me so happy, especially the fact that she dropped Sister Rosetta Tharpe's name, you know, like little bits like that. The fact that she said Grace Jones and Aaliyah twice, like those kinds of acknowledgements meant a lot to me, as did the pure honey existence and Moi Renee getting her flowers, you know, 35 years after her death. I was very, very happy and surprised by that. Like, it was the middle of the night and I was texting people and I was really expecting to get cussed out because you're not supposed to text people after like midnight. But other friends of mine were also listening at the same time and having exactly the same reaction. Miss Honey was a formative song in our college years when we discovered it. So yeah, the album, you know, it hit me in all the places it needed to, and you know, I'm planning to do a thing with it myself. More details coming soon.
Okay.
Ooh, okay.
All right.
It was definitely the homage paid in it that just got to me too. Like like I feel like I don't know. I feel like I feel like we got a different view. We got like a different kind of view into what Beyonce listens to. And what she's been rocking with. I was like, oh, I feel like I know you in a different way, B. Like, especially as I listened to it multiple times, like the layers, I was just like, oh, okay, girl. Okay. Okay, girl. You tapped in some ways that I did not know. And just the different genres of like electronic music, Black electronic music that she explored. I love when someone can do a clear mixture of putting their spin on it and keeping things like to that simple like essence. Like, this is straight up gonna sound like Chicago house. I'm gonna put some stank on it later, but like let me just like give it to you straight for a minute. Or it was just so Good. Just so good. And I also, the third thing that I loved about it was that to me, to fully understand it, it had to be an embodied experience. You have to let yourself dance to it.
Yes.
You
Yes.
have to.
Yes.
I didn't fully get it until I danced to it. Until I had to I really let loose, and I would just had the speakers with the good bass on it and just let yourself, your whole body start bobbing. And yeah. So if you think it's not, if you ain't really rocking with it yet, try dancing to it. If anyone out there is not a believer yet, just try it. Just try it and see how you feel.
And for me, it's just this unabashed just celebration of just Black queerness for me. And it is just so beautiful. There are just not a whole lot of spaces where Black queer folks are celebrated. And if they are, it is for some capitalistic purpose, or it's for to sort of steal some of the innovations and just the beauty of what we do in order to sort of repurpose it for some BS. But here is just this pure, beautiful distillation, just this look at this beautiful culture over here. And dance and enjoy and learn about the history, learn about some of these artists, learn about why this is such a special, and it just made me as a queer Black person just feel so seen and so loved.
Yes.
It felt like there was just a warm hug around me while I was getting my life and shaking my ass. I'm also being hugged. And it's just perfect. I think it's perfect, but
Unless you're Khalees, this has been a very good album for you.
I mean, I empathize with Khalees, but I'm still gonna get my life. So.
I mean,
I wanna dance, girl. I don't know what to tell you.
I don't know what to tell you.
The alacrity with which she responded to that, I have to say, it just kind of tickled me just a little bit. So, and, well, but I do have a petty streak. I think most people don't know that about me.
Oh, I missed you guys.
Same.
Okay, and that is going to do it for 2022. My goodness gracious. Before we close out this year, I just want to, on behalf of Lee and Paige, just send out some huge thank yous. First, thank you, the incredible Emily Mettenbrink. We could not do this show without you. You are such a blessing, such a godsend to us. Thank you so much for keeping us organized, keeping the guests organized. It's really been just such a wonderful journey doing this show with you. She's basically our fourth co-host at this point. But I also want to thank the entire Impact team for all of your tireless support and your help. Frankie, Samuel, Faye, Sarah, Rick, God, who am I forgetting? Daniel. And I really also just want to thank Minnesota Opera for all of your support for these past 2 years. So we will be back in 2023. We've got some great guests, like I said, at the top of the show. And it's going to be a really spectacular year. I don't know if you've heard, but Lee has some news, and I'm sure we'll get into that in January. But if you haven't heard about that, you can just Google, I'm sure. But yeah, it's going to be a spectacular year, and hope all of you are enjoying the holidays. Hope you had a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, beautiful solstice, and that you have a Happy New Year. As always, please don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. If at any point this year there was something that you really, really enjoyed, it would really, really help us out to know that you enjoyed it and to let everyone else know that you enjoyed it. 5 stars, of course. And just tell your friends about us. And if there's anything that you want to talk to us about, hit us up at thescore@mnopera.org, and we'd love to hear from you. So I'm gonna go enjoy the rest of my vacation. I'll see you in January, and Happy New Year. Bye.